Some of you may recognize the situation I'm about to describe, and it's not a scripted situation. It's my situation, my real one. 10, 11 years ago, that's how long I've been a customer now. I started YNAB because of debt, lots of debt. And then I discovered as I sat down to give dollars a job, as I sat down to follow rule number 1, that's when I realized what the big problem is with debt, what the challenge is. And some of you, raise your hand if you have, may also have experienced it. The challenge is that for every debt we now have one more category in the budget that takes money off our paychecks when our paychecks come in. Have any of you experienced that one? Raise your hand if you have. It's the cash flow squeeze, isn't it? It's the fact that every debt is a category and every category needs money, and our paychecks have not got bigger, but they now have to be spread more thinly. Yeah, I'm not going to read through all the names there, but a good 60, 65% of you there recognize that. Some of you won't have been budgeting long enough yet. So we need a strategy to handle that situation. And what we need are clear steps. So let's start with step number 1. When you have precious dollars to give a job to, where are we going to put them first when we've got such a huge range of choices of categories that could get it? Where do we put them first? We put them towards the priorities first. So think about your monthly bills here, your immediate obligations, things like rent or the mortgage, things like groceries, things like gas, things like utility bills. They are going to need their money. So we'll give them their money first, the monthly bills. But as about 70% of you have already experienced, the problem is that when we've got debts, we've got more of these to cover. Because as well as having to cover the regular monthly expenses, we've got to send at least the minimum payments to every single debt that we have. Otherwise, they're gonna slap us with a penalty. So step number 1, the very first place that we're going to budget money to is going to be monthly bills, including minimum payments to debt. These are my 3 credit card balances today. Each of those 3 credit cards requires a minimum payment set by the credit card company. And, excuse me one moment. Okay, a little problem with the file here, but nothing that we can't resolve very quickly. Let me just take care of that. My apologies here. It wasn't what I was expecting to walk into, but we will just fix that right now. Okay. So here we are. There are the 3 credit cards with the balances. The minimum payments for each of them are set by the credit card company. And there I've budgeted for the 3 minimum payments towards each credit card. Now I also have a couple of other debts, the kind of debts where there is no option to send a minimum. It's things like a student loan, an auto loan, a personal loan. All we have to be concerned with is the monthly payment because there is no minimum. And so there are my 2 monthly amounts. So for the 5 debts that I have right now, these are the 5 smallest amounts I can get away with sending them. And then of course here are all the rest of those regular monthly bills. Now some of you will be starting YNAB with enough money today to be able to budget all of your minimums and monthly bills in one go, in which case, good, that's what you'll do. The rest of us, like me when I started, who don't have enough today to do that, what do? Well, we take what we've got, we budget to the priorities. When we get more, we budget again and fill in the rest. When we get more, we budget again and fill in. And so whether it takes you 1 check and you can do it all in one go, or whether it takes you 2, 3, or 4 checks before you can do it, it doesn't change the priority. Let's cover those minimums and monthly bills before anything else. Step 1. I've opened up the question window. If you would be so kind as to raise your hand in the window if you are absolutely comfortable and ready to see the next step, if all of that made complete, intuitive, common sense, raise those hands. If you have any question, any comment, any clarification that you may desire, you can hit me up in the Q&A window there. And we'll take care of it as we can. But no, it looks like we've got a full range of hands there. Yeah, all clear. Excellent. Right then. So let's assume that either we've covered it in one go or it's taken a few checks and we've reached that point where we've covered it. Where do we now start to allocate the dollars? Do we now start to send it to debt? Not yet. We've covered the monthly bills. We have all got non-monthly bills that are just as certain. Things like Christmas if you celebrate it, which we've got, what, less than 6 months for now. Things like quarterly bills, maybe insurance type stuff, annual bills, subscriptions, domain name registrations, auto maintenance, home maintenance, clothing, computer repairs. All of that stuff is going to take money at some point. And what kind of debt repayment plan will we have if it doesn't include preventing this debt from happening in the future? Because that is surely what's going to happen if I don't start to set money away for these things each month. They will create debt when they happen. And I do not want a debt repayment plan that creates more debt. I want a debt repayment plan that gets me out of it. So for step number 2, the next thing that we're going to start to cover each month is we're going to cover a little bit towards those non-monthly true expenses. This is me starting to build up $50 towards emergencies. This is me starting to put the money away for the quarterly car insurance, for things breaking around the house, things breaking around the car, and the rest of it. So let me check in with you there. I know it's not quite as intuitive really as step number 1, is it? We all tend to think about step number 1 and priorities as being, yeah, got to get the money ready for that bill on Wednesday. But are you comfortable? Raise your hand again if you're absolutely comfortable and clear on what we're doing here with step 2. And maybe even just as importantly, why we are doing it. Why we are making it part of our sustainable budget. There's no point sending money to debt and then going back into debt and sending money to debt and going into debt, because then you can never be debt free. Kareem, great comment. Kareem as well as saying it's true, you can't ever be out of debt if you're relying on debt for an essential. Yeah, and maybe not even an essential. You might not say gifts is essential, but if you know that you are going to be spending money on gifts at say Christmas or friends' birthdays or families, then it almost becomes essential, doesn't it? Because we're going to be spending money on it, and if we don't put money away for them, it's going to be debt. Yeah, but Kareem's second point is that it also gives you a realistic view of what is left for fun out of paychecks, doesn't it just? Yeah, let me just lower those hands because I want to ask everybody the same question. How many of you just come to the same conclusion as Kareem there? That when you start to put money aside for these things realistically, doesn't it really bring home what your true cost of living is before we get to discretionary? Yeah, Meredith, straight in the air, Guy, straight. And Guy, let me know, it is Guy, not Guy. Let me know if it's the alternative pronunciation. I want to make sure I get that right. Scarlett as well. Scott as well. Yeah, that's the thing, right, Karen? Yes, very much indeed. Cheers, Guy. Okay, where next then? Where next? Well, we kind of mentioned fun just there. And should we even be thinking of budgeting for fun if I've got debt? Well, my strong advice to you as somebody who spent the first 8 years using YNAB getting out of his debt, my strong advice to you would be, if you possibly can, please, please, please do so. The number of times I started a debt repayment budget where I said, that's it, this is what's going to give, and I promise myself I'll be serious this time and I'll stick to it. And maybe I did for a week, and then I did for 2, and maybe sometimes 4 weeks and 5 weeks. And then something happens that needs fun money that you're not going to turn your back on. Or you have a terrible week and you want some delicious take in Indian food or Chinese food or whatever it may be. So what I would say to you is, unless you absolutely don't have paycheck money left at this point, or maybe if you've only got a couple of months to go before you are debt free, and you can knuckle down for 3 months and spend nothing on fun with that wonderful thought of what's waiting for you. Everybody else who's going to take 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 3 years, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, 15 years, we need to put money aside because firstly, we need this to be sustainable. And secondly, there's no point having a perfect budget if we can't stick to it for more than a month. So let me lower those hands again. Is everybody comfortable with this idea about why we're being realistic here? Are you comfortable? Maybe even do you agree with me? Raise your hand there. Do you agree with me that if I was looking at 8 years of debt repayment as I was, what was the chance of me sticking to that for 8 years without ever putting something aside and having fun? The answer is 0, isn't it? It's like a crash diet. A crash diet where you live on the minimum calories possible. Well, mathematically, it's supposed to work. And there's nothing wrong with the math. The problem is nobody can stick to them for long enough to make a difference. Same with a crash budget. So let's not crash budget. Let's be realistic. Yeah, again, Laura. Oh, 2 Lauras now. Laura G, Laura A. Laura A, another great comment. Laura A says, so we're really delaying the debt repayment at the expense of sticking to the plan. Correct. I may be putting a little bit of extra time on a repayment. Maybe a couple of months here, maybe even 6 months if I was looking at a long enough period of debt. But I'd much rather get it paid down than give up again. Yeah, dead right. And step 2 is what helps us decide what is realistic within the plan. Kareem, great point. It's because as the money came in, we covered these things, that we're able to look at what was left and say, yeah, you know what, I can put 100 here, 50 here, 50 here, and I've still got $275 out of my last check to decide what to do with. That was reasonable. It was reasonable because I'd had to go down. We're going to be guessing these numbers to begin with. We certainly are, Julie. These numbers especially. These numbers up here are going to be less guesswork. They're a little bit more predictable, eh? And these numbers here are given to us by our debts. But these ones here are certainly where most people will be guessing to begin with. And I do want you to guess. Get used to putting something away for all those reasons Kareem mentioned. But what will get you better at this is time. Like everything with budgeting, it's a knowledge skill. The more you do it, the better it gets at it. So what's going to help you here? Mathematically, what will help you is things like the average spent. It's going to be telling you, once you've got a few months in, it's going to be saying, hey, I know you think you spend this much, but here's what you actually spend on average. And at that point, we'll be able to come back and revisit these guesses. And then we'll be able to have a guess that's based on at least some degree of history and evidence, yeah? Rather than just a number we may be pulling out of the air on day one. And I certainly had very little idea about these numbers. Why? Well, I had no idea because that's why I was starting to budget, to try and learn a little about these things. Yeah, and Meredith says you can then create goals for these things as well to set that plan in place then, right, Meredith? Just like we did in the template workshop. Absolutely. Absolutely, we'd be working our way down here. We'd be setting goals for all of this. We'd be making sure we're consciously making a plan for the month here as the money comes in. And then finally, as we've given ourselves a little bit realistic down here, we can then take a good look at the number, the money that's left out of the last paycheck, and say that to the best of our ability right now, this is our sustainable debt repayment amount. This is an amount I can send to debt that still allows me to prevent debt in the future and have the fun that's so essential to sticking to the plan. So what do we do with it then? What do we do with this debt repayment amount? Well, we're going to now target a debt, just one of them. We're going to leave the other debts with their minimum payments. What do we do? Which debt do we target? We have an opinion on this. It's a strong one because it's based on a great deal of evidence of people who use YNAB. The method that seems to simply gel with YNAB's method beautifully is we're going to start with the debt we can get rid of the quickest, which will be the smallest debt. And why have people discovered that getting rid of that one seems to be most effective? 2 reasons. Number one, you get a really quick psychological victory that proves to you that the strategy you're following is working and you're following it correctly and it's giving you results. That is priceless, as they say. But there is also that key cash flow reason. Remember what we discussed, and about 70–75% of you agreed, and you'd recognized it so far, that the real problem is that for every debt we have money being taken off our paycheck before we can even decide what to do with it. And the sooner we can go from 5 debts doing that to 4, the better. Because then, when every check comes in, it's got one less job to do up here. Cash flow boost. So we're going to target the debt we can get rid of the quickest, which for me is this MasterCard. I know I've got up to $275 to use to repay it because of the work we've already done. And I'm now going to use a goal on the target debt to lock it in place and to stop me from having to go through this exercise every month to come up with the number. So with $50 already there for the minimum, let's create a goal to repay the balance. Will we be able to do it by August? Well, we're able to tell now. Let's see what that would take. It would take $312.50 extra this month, and it would then take $362.50 for the next month, neither of which are achievable for me. You see the value of discovering this number now? So that tells me it is too aggressive. I could give myself plenty of leeway here by moving it a few months out, but let's just see what's achievable here in September. An extra month. That's $191.67 this month, and then $241.67 for the remainder. Both of those are achievable, and that's what I'm going to go for. So let's now allocate what we need to the MasterCard using Quick Budget here. The goal target becomes a button to allocate the money automatically. I've now got $241.67 set aside for MasterCard. The other debts have each got their minimums. Happens to leave me with $83.33. And just to show you, there's a number of things you could do with this money. Number one, you could beat the goal in the month. And the advantage to beating that goal is that it's then going to reduce the amounts that are needed in the future months. Very, very useful tactic for those of you with variable income. You get a good month, beat the goal. Then next month, the month after, when the money's maybe not quite so big coming in, that goal is then a lot smaller. So beat the goal is one option. I'll throw an extra 33 and change on there. And the other thing to then consider once you've got a realistic amount to repay and a date that will give you is then to come down and revisit some of these other categories and think about whether this remaining money could be better employed down there. I mean, now you know what you're able to do. Now the bills are all comfortable. I've got something there for fun. I'll see how that goes and I'll nudge it up and down if I need to. But I do think the place that's going to help me sleep the best is a little bit more to start what is an important category to me, being a very long way out in the middle of nowhere, car maintenance money. So I'll give myself that final money to kickstart that category. So there we go. Let me lower the hands. Are you comfortable there as we've gone through? I know a lot of questions came in during each stage, but raise your hand if you're comfortable with that final stage. The whole purpose of the steps is to come up with the sustainable repayment amount. Then we can look at our target debt. We recommend that it's the smallest one, and then we can dial that in with a lot more certainty. Sherry, good comment. Sherry says, I like the fact you use the word sustainable. I get it, right. Yeah, it's sustainable because that amount we're sending to debt is not me sending it to debt and hoping that I don't need to buy clothes this month for the kids. It's not me sending it to debt hoping that that is then going to be enough to buy groceries, fix the car, have something for fun. Terry as well, Terry G. Also appreciate the comment now about being realistic for fun. Yes, because think about how we may feel guilty right now. Let me lower those hands that are saying you're comfortable. Let me ask all those hands again, one more question. How many of you right now feel guilty when you spend money on yourself because you know you've got debt? We're up into the 80% again. Me too. So am I now going to continue to spend money on fun because it's budgeted and feel guilty? Well, my experience is that the guilt stops. So let me just lower the hands again. It's a very handy little tool, this, if you pardon the pun. Let me lower them. We've only just got it. How many of you who just raised your hand at feeling guilty when you spend on fun? I want you to all imagine now a wonderful day where the only debt you have is your mortgage. Would you still feel guilty spending money on fun then? Raise your hand if you still would. And now I get no hands. Now, strange that, isn't it? We think we're going to feel guilty because we spend money because we've got debt, and yet our mortgage is our biggest debt for most of us in our life. Why aren't we feeling guilty then? It's because the mortgage has got a plan to repay it. So what I discovered, and I hope some of those of you with a lot of debt discover this as well, it's not going to take however long to get debt free before that guilt disappears. Because when you can see with a plan, like I've got, that I am able to cover what I can, like I have, and make a $275 a month repayment to my first debt, and still, as part of that, spend some fun money, go out for dinner every now and again. That's why I'm not going to feel guilty when I spend that money now, because it's spending money within a plan. And I do think that's a very, very big moral boosting, or morale boosting, I should say, state of mind. It's not the paying off the debt that stops you feeling the guilt. It is simply having the plan. When you have the plan, the guilt disappears. Your life's about to change, Tom. You're quite right. Laura, seems like the highest balanced or the highest interest rate should be first, not necessarily the smallest. If you choose to do that, Laura, you can. We have an opinion for you. We're not going to force you to do it. You could have chosen, instead of putting your sustainable debt repayment amount there, and you could leave that at the minimum payment, you could put your sustainable repayment amount to there instead, and you would now be paying down, let's say, the Visa instead. But the one thing I'd want you to consider, Laura, that money paying down this balance is not going to give me a cash flow boost for probably 4.5 years. For 4.5 years, whilst I'm paying that down with that money, I'll have 5 debts taking money off my paycheck. So I want you just to consider the possibility, just like the crash diet, which mathematically should work, I want you to consider the possibility of the advantage of going for the smallest one. Because then when you get your paychecks, you're not going to have 5 debts taking money off. You only have 4. And that is going to happen in September, not 2023. So have a think about it, Laura. But I absolutely do want to let you know that there is nothing baked into the software there. Yep, Catherine, step 1. Let's do a quick revision there. There are the 3 steps. We first of all cover all of the monthly bills, which includes the monthly minimum payments to every debt. When they're covered, we've got peace of mind. Step number 2, and we've got more money to budget then, we cover the non-monthly contributions there to prevent debt in the future. Then we target the debt of our choice with the sustainable repayment amount. We suggest the smallest balance. And then, of course, as a few of you have mentioned, as we've gone through the wonderful questions and comments today, then we can start to look at this budget as a work in progress. Then as we learn more about what we're spending really on food and dining out and clothes and gas, and when we start to get all that real information in, then we're able to come back to here and revisit the plan. Maybe in 3 months when the MasterCard is gone, when there's 1 less debt to service, when I've had 3 months to learn about the spending in these categories, 3 months when that debt is gone will be a perfect opportunity to come back and repeat this exercise from step 1 again, with less being taken off me and more information and averages. So yeah, Going to be a constant revisitation of this, yeah. Catherine, don't worry about spending on these credit cards as we are planning to pay it down. As you'll see in the credit card workshop, if you haven't had a chance to see that yet, in the credit card workshop, we'll show that by budgeting money to food, let's say, we are then able to use the credit card to buy the food. And what YNAB will do is take that money in groceries and add it on to whatever we're sending to the debt. So if I spent $100 on groceries today and used my MasterCard, there would be an extra $100 automatically added to the MasterCard repayment amount. So you are definitely going to be able to continue to spend on the card if you need to do so. And we are definitely going to be able to stop that affecting and slowing down the repayment of your debt. Check out the credit card workshop. You'll find out how. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I do think we are pretty much there. I'm having one little last look down the question window. And I'm glad to see a lot of you using words like hope. That's always an excellent word to see in this workshop because it is a stressful place to be. But I promise you, when you have gone back and looked at your budget through these stages, come up with those numbers, had a good guess and been comfortable with some of them, I promise you, you will feel better even before you've even made a payment to your first debt. Because you'll have a plan in front of you, you'll see what's realistic, you'll then learn more. So good, I'm really, really pleased at that. So what's coming up next? Let me drop the link in the window here for you. We're going to move over subjects now. We're going to switch over from debt. We've just done credit card overspending and debt repayment. Let's jump over to the savings side of things. I know a few of you have been wondering and waiting for this workshop. How do we handle savings? How do we accumulate savings? How do we stop ourselves from spending them on impulse purchases? In fact, anything to do with savings whatsoever. So if you want to join me in about 4 minutes time, I'll be opening the window there in about a minute. And I've dropped the registration link into the chat window for you, if you haven't already registered, that is. My name's Dave. Hope to see you soon. Bye for now.